So continuing on with the notes, we are going to find the midpoint on number 2. We are going to find our x values, add them up in parentheses like we said, and then divide by 2. So we should have gotten negative 9 over 2. And if you hit Control Enter on your Inspire calculator, you get negative 4.5. And for our y values, we're adding up our y's, 2 plus negative 7 in parentheses, dividing by 2. That's going to give us negative 5 over 2. And again, Control Enter will give you negative 2.5. Now remember, I want a coordinate answer with the commas and the parentheses, so please make sure you put x, comma, y. Okay? I got to have an answer like it says up here, x, comma, y. Okay? So again, always have the right format at the end. Same with number 3. We're going to add up those x's using our midpoint formula. 12 plus negative 5. Divide that by 2. It's going to give us 7 over 2, which is 3.5. Same thing with our y's. Negative 7 in parentheses. Negative 7 plus negative 2 over 2. We get negative 9 over 2, which is negative 4.5. Once we get our x and our y, we want to make sure we put it as an ordered pair, x, comma, y, and we know we have our midpoint. Now, I want to stress something. At the top right of this screen, you see that this is only when you're given 2 endpoints, okay? So, if it says find the midpoint between these 2 points, that's assumed that they're endpoints. If it says they're endpoints, then they're endpoints. But number 4 and 5, I want us to notice the difference. Okay? So down here on number 4, it says 1 endpoint of a segment, and then it says, and the midpoint. We are not given both endpoints. This time, as you can see over here, we are given the endpoint and the midpoint. This is a different type of problem. You cannot do it the exact same way. Okay? So I'm going to show you a method. There are multiple methods to doing this, but I'm showing you one method. This is more intuitive than algebraic. So when you do this method, you're only going to do it when there's a midpoint and an endpoint, not 2 endpoints. So here's what I want you to do on number 4. Off to the left. Go ahead and draw yourself a little segment with a midpoint. Okay? All right, so I want you to label E for endpoints right here. So we got E and E for endpoints, and then go ahead and label an M for midpoint. Here's the reason. I want you to get a visual about what they're giving us. It says one endpoint is negative 5, negative 3. So let's go ahead and, in red, put negative 5, comma, negative 3 right here. And instead of giving us the other endpoint, it says it gives us a midpoint of 1, comma, 3. So right here, I'm going to put 1, comma, 3. And it asks us to find the other endpoint. So notice, if I know the end and the middle, this creates a half that has to be equal to the other half, right? That's what a midpoint does, cuts it exactly in half. So I want you to notice, if I can find the difference from this endpoint to this midpoint, that difference is going to be the same difference to the other endpoint. Okay? So what I'm going to do is try to find these little differences so I can continue the pattern. Okay? So, on the left-hand side, the x values. How do I get from a negative 5 up to a positive 1? Okay, very good. So that's going from negative 5 up to 1 is an addition or an adding of 6. Okay? So negative 5 plus 6. You can go ahead and write that in there in between. We added 6 to get to 1. So guess what we're going to do down here to get to the other endpoint? Add 6. So what is 1 plus 6? Okay, so down here we're going to have 7. And then on the y side, how do I get from negative 3 up to positive 3? Now this is coincidentally the same number. It's not always. But once again, we're going to add 6. Negative 3 plus 6 gives me 3. So again, I'm going to add 6. What is 3 plus 6? Right here should be 9. So guess what the other endpoint is? 7, 9. Okay? Again, there is another method, an algebraic way to get that number, but I think this is more intuitive. If you can just think of end to middle, continue the pattern. Okay? Let's try it again on number 5. So what was my first step? Draw that little segment on the left-hand side. Bless you, by the way. And then we label our letters, endpoints, midpoint. So it says my endpoint is negative 3, 4. Go ahead and write that down. The other endpoint I do not know. And then it says find the midpoint. Or sorry, the midpoint is given negative 1, 1. And so now I'm looking for the other endpoint. I'm going to do it just the same exact way I did on the last problem, right? I'm going to find the differences. So to get from negative 3 to negative 1, what is that difference? Okay, so I hear plus 2. That's great. Now, some people have trouble figuring out that difference, right? So let me give you a kind of a general rule. If you want to find the green numbers I'm writing, the difference, always take the midpoint number minus the endpoint number. So check it out. Negative 1 minus negative 3 does give you plus 2, positive 2. Okay? I can do the same thing on the right side. The midpoint is 1, the endpoint is 4. What's 1 minus 4? One minus 4? Negative 3. Okay? So doesn't that make sense? Aren't we going from 4 down to 1? So we are subtracting 3. So this is a minus 3. So guess what we're going to do? Continue the pattern. So what is negative 1 plus 2 right here? Positive 1. If you didn't know that, your calculator, you can do those little computations in your calculator, right? And then over here, this one is going to be minus 3. We're matching it up. What is 1 minus 3? Negative 2. So my final answer for the other endpoint is going to be 1, negative 2. Now, I can't stress this enough. This method is your method if you're given what two things? Off to the right it says, given an endpoint and a midpoint, right? But what if you're given two endpoints? Then you do it like the top half of the notes, okay? So, if you flip it over, we need to talk about distance formula. Okay, how many of y'all have seen this formula on the top of this page? I hope you have seen it in Algebra 1. Distance formula. Guess what you do, what you use it for? To find distance. Okay, the name tells you. So, on number 6, if I'm going to use these 2 points, here is my x2 and my x1. And then I got my y2 and my y1. So I'm going to use those in a formula. I do need everyone to follow along, especially when I get to the calculator part, because I want to make sure you type it in correctly. First, we have to, and I'm saying this again, you do have to write down what you type in. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to write the exact distance formula. So the letter D equals, and go ahead and draw a very long square root. Okay? Then we're going to use our what? What's next? The parentheses. And then we start with x2 minus sign x1. So x2 is 4. And then you must put a minus sign. Okay? Then my x1 is negative 4. Does everyone see it's possible to have a minus then a negative? Okay? what do I have to put after that parentheses? Squared. And then we're going to add, same thing with our y's. So parentheses, y2 is 9. I have to put my minus sign. And then y1 is 3. Don't forget the very last, squared. Squared. The square root is the big sign over everything. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take that. It's going to be over here. And I'm going to take that to my calculator. So what I want everyone to do is make sure you have a nice fresh screen on your calculator. So you go ahead and pull it up and press on. Okay. If you press the on button at the top right, you get this screen right here. I'd like for you to have a new document. So it's fresh. Okay. So number 1, or press new document, do not save, and then hit add calculator. All right. Once you're here, we are going to type into our calculator what we had written down. So it's supposed to be square root. Now, where's the square root button? On the left side, it's in blue, it's small. If you hit Control X squared, there it is. You have to type everything in carefully and exactly the way we wrote it. So let's do that. First thing I see is parentheses. Then I'm going to put 4 minus sign, negative sign, 4, end the parentheses, and then your squared button is right here. Okay? Now some people are getting this wrong because they press the right button. Do not press the right button. Just go ahead and press the plus sign right now. Plus, and then your parentheses, 9, minus sign, 3, end the parentheses, and then don't forget that last squared. So it's called a squared. So after you type all of this in correctly, just the way you see it on your sheet, you hit enter and you should get 10, right? So we're going to write that down on here. Letter D equals 10. So on number 7, there's how you set it up. And if you type it in correctly, you should get 11.18. On number 8, since we only have it from endpoint to midpoint, would you agree from the endpoint to the midpoint is only half? Right? That's only halfway. So I can find that distance, but if I'm looking for the whole CD, I'm going to end up having to take that half and multiply it by 2. If you only find half, you have to multiply it by 2 to get the whole thing, right? Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So we set up the formula like so. When we type it into the calculator, we get 6.4. What's wrong with that? That's supposed to be a 2, not a 3. All right, so you live and you learn, right? So disregarding this last one right here, looking at this last one without the typo, it's supposed to be 7.21, but that's only halfway. So right now, I could hit times 2, and it would take that prior number and double it. So my final answer would be 14.42, okay? So we got 7.21, but we have to multiply it by 2 to get 14.42. How did I know I needed to double it at the end? Because it was endpoint to midpoint. So you must double it if they give you a midpoint. Okay, please don't forget that, because you're going to have some of these curveball problems where they're not giving you 2 endpoints, they're giving you 1 midpoint and 1 endpoint.